आह्वान किया, वर्षों जकड़ी बेड़ियों को अब तो तोड़ो। क्रांति की मशाल जला गांधी बोले, अंग्रेजों भारत छोड़ो। बहुत सहा गुलामी को अब ना सहेंगे, आजादी की बात रही वो लेके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। उसी अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। गांव गांव अब विकसित हो, जन जन स्वाभिमानी हो, देश में ना रहे गरीबी, विकास ही अपनी निशानी हो। एक क्रांति फिर ऐसी हो, रगों में वही रवानी हो, कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर सबने बस यही ठानी हो। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे।
Moderated by Santosh Singh, Director of IntelliCap, this session marks the launch of the Indian Agriculture and Food System Circularity Action Platform. Santosh introduces this joint initiative of TRI and IntelliCap set up to promote the uptake of circular approaches in agriculture and food systems in India, improving and diversifying incomes of smallholder farmers, virtual water, environmental footprint of agriculture and food systems, as we improve the resilience of agriculture production and incomes in the face of climate change. I now hand over the call to Gajanan sir to take the session ahead.
Thank you, Chavi, so much, and welcome all the participants. A very warm welcome to all of you to the India Rural Colloquium. We are basically looking to bring insights, efforts, and partnership and ideas to set us on a path for lasting impact to the communities. This particular session is going to be very, very special, as we will deep dive into the challenges, opportunities, and way forward for resilience and growth of the small and marginal farmers by way of circularity and profitable agriculture ideas. India's aspiration of 5 trillion economy is critical to ensure better lives for all Indians. At present, the effort is largely focused on non-farm sectors, but with this, we are staring at an unfolding crisis. Where would the people who quit farming will be absorbed? Currently, they account for a large number of underemployment and also the unemployed youth. They stick to agriculture despite knowing that it is not very remunerative. So the crisis has its adverse effect on the small and marginal farmers. I lead the technical assistance team at NRLM on farm livelihoods. This fact and paucity of opportunity keeps me awake at night. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the excellent panel that we have together with us. I'm looking forward to learning how we take the present low equilibrium of institutions, people, and resources in farm sector to regenerative and resilient growth that will require knowledge, technology, linkages, and partnership. In their domain expertise and sweep, our panelists will comprehensively cover the entire spectrum of issues impacting farming. Let me also introduce you to the panelists here. Madam Sivali Krishnan has long and deep experience of working with farmers and government system, exciting world of digital farmer services from her days with Australian Aid, USAID, and also she leads the Gates Foundation's engagement in Bihar and with the national government. Madam Aparna Bijapurkar, partner at the BCG Consulting Group, is an expert with an unique vantage position. She works with the corporates a lot. Her team provides design and implementation support on agriculture infrastructure fund. She particularly understands the tailwinds and headwinds on farm sector and modern supply chain like none. Mr. Ashok, who is a director of farm prosperity in TRIF, brings in the ground experiences. He is probably the best in the country understanding the marginal farmers context. He has done farming, studied farming, and published multiple research papers. He melds the practical reality of farming, and farmers together as we search new pathways to profitable agriculture. Madam Melissa is the Senior Vice President, Freshwater and Food, WWF, has another unique perspective looking at the agriculture and nutrition, agriculture, women interactions, landscapes, and freshwaters, diversity, intensity, and implication in the context of climate risks. Dr. Bhaskar Reddy, who is the Executive Director at Syngenta Foundation, India, brings special intersectional view from his deep expertise on farmers, corporate government, startup, fintech. He is always our go-to person. He is an ideapreneur, rather I would say, seeding tomorrow's farming. The great panel is hosted by Mr. Santosh Singh, who is the Director and Head Energy and Climate Change and Agriculture at IntelCap, and also lead the Indian Agriculture and Food Systems, Circularity and Action platform launched by IntelCap and TRIF together to promote the uptake of circular approaches in agriculture and food systems in India. With much ado, I think it's time I request Mr. Santosh to carry forward the discussion, and all of us are excited to learn from the interaction by the extreme and distinguished panelists. Over to you, Santosh. Thanks.
Thank you, Gajananji, and a warm welcome to all the participants and the panelists. It's a pleasure to be here and having this stellar panel with us. I think before we begin, I would put some pointers at what we're trying to extract from here. And to do that, I need to put some context, I think, to this audience and to this panel. We don't need to talk about the importance of small landhold farmers and what they're going through. We all know that they are struggling with dual fight within the pandemic and the climate change and the reduced productivity, the yield, etc. And there are so many things happening around the world that we expect them to learn from and kind of improve their productivity, be more entrepreneurial, adopt new practices. Yet this is a very big ask on them. So in this panel, we are trying to kind of have some discussion and learn from all the panels that how we can take the small landhold farmers to adopt circularity, increase their profitability, and become more resilient in changing times. To give you some context to people who are kind of looking at the numbers and have the penchant for that, 65% of the farmers in India are basically doing agriculture with less than 0.4 hectares of land, and their income from the agriculture practices every month is very kind of minuscule if you compare to the entire world. At the same time, agriculture is also being seen as one of the major polluters or major contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions globally. Although in India, the situation is very different. We are still kind of negligent in that part. while we are not contributing to this climate change that much, but we are being penalized, or we are the victims of the climate change and a number of other things. On the climate change front, I think if you look at the many of these estimates, we see that the productivity of the small landholder farmers will be hit by 30 to 40% by 2050. Just imagine that if they are already struggling with low productivity, that going further down would have a very, very big impact on their livelihood and their economic conditions. Now, if you look at the circularity concept and other dimensions that kind of hamper their productivity, we are struggling with our processes and the systems and the infrastructure that result into almost fruit and vegetable losses worth 2 lakh crore annually from Indian agriculture. So there is a huge loss happening because of the lack of infrastructure. There is a huge threat of climate change on the small landholder farmers. However, not all is that bad. If we look at a study by Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we are talking about that the Indian food system and agriculture could create 3.9 lakh crore of opportunity here. We can also, if we adopt the regenerative agriculture globally, it can contribute to 23 gigaton of carbon emission from the globe, which is more than what it is contributing. So it can be a carbon positive. However, all said and done, this requires a phenomenal shift in the way the small landholder farmers do agriculture, the way we build their capacity, the way we help them transition to this more sustainable, more resilient, and more circular, eventually turning out to be a more profitable agriculture practice to them. The launch of the partnership between TRIF and IntelliCap to support these farmers transition to a better circular and profitable agriculture and food systems is a step in that direction. But on the panel today, since we have speakers who have a very, very different perspective on this topic, and I would try to extract that from them. One dimension that emerges is that entrepreneurship, especially the entrepreneurship that had potential to disrupt the income generation capacity or disrupt the sector to be more circular and more resilient, is key ask. However, that's easier said than done. Now we have with us, panelists who are either supporting entrepreneurs, or they are working with small landholder farmers, or they are building the ecosystem, or they are privy to the global developments and best practices that could be helpful in making this transition happen. So this is the context where this discussion would happen. And the discussion has the structure where I would request each of the panels to come and give the opening remark. Then there will be a follow-up question, and then we engage with the audience on the Q&A. I would request everyone to participate in the discussion as our esteemed speakers are giving their thoughts. You can put that into the chat box, and we can either respond to that in the chat box, or I would be taking a few questions at the end of this thing. So with this context, I would like to invite Mr. Ashok, who has been pretty the treasure house of the knowledge when it comes to working with the small landholder farmers. And his opening remark, I would like to see that how critical is the transition of the small and marginal farmers to circular and profitable, or say, I would say circular, more resilient and profitable agriculture. And the second part is that you have worked with these farmers for over the years and in different ways. What are the 3 key areas where you see the transition to have the highest business, social, and environmental potential for these farmers? So if in your opening remark, you can highlight that, that would set the context for other panelists to come and kind of contribute. So over to you, Ashok.
Yeah, thank you, Santosh, and many thanks for inviting me to share my own experiences that years. And I am also looking forward to learn a lot from the panel here. So as you asked that why it is important for the smallholder farmers to transit from towards the circular and the 2011 census. And I think this is the first time we are experiencing that the number of cultivators is reducing, and the number of laborers and the migrants is increasing. So most of the smallholder farmers, they are now migrating towards the cities and looking for their livelihoods. So, and these are the large numbers. So to me, it is a national challenge. So do we think that how to deal with that? And if you consider what kind of work they are doing when they go to the cities, so the young generation or the youth who are migrating from rural areas to the urban areas, it is very apparent that the kind of education and the kind of skill set they have with the training and education in the rural areas, they hardly have any opportunities in the cities. So the kind of human condition they are going through in the cities is, I think, not very desirable. So I see it required to be changed. This is one. And second, since they don't have the skill that is required in the cities, but they have basic skills in agriculture. So if that skill can be enhanced from the present subsistence farming to a kind of a future farming, so that basic skills can be upgraded. So this kind of human dignity and some income can be accessed by these smallholder farmers. So these kind of challenges and the human dignity can be preserved for these smallholder farmers. So I see a lot of opportunity for smallholder farmers to embark on the journey for the future of farming. That is mostly towards the circular and regenerative farming that the whole world is looking for. So it's high time to engage with the smallholder farmers and take them towards this regenerative farming. This is one. Second is when we see the agriculture of smallholder farmers, we find that mostly the technology and the farming practices that they adopt is coming from irrigated areas, and where the resource endowment and skill set of farmers are very different than these smallholder farmers. So the technology they are adopting in these rain-fed and small farms are many times very, very risky. So what are the alternatives? So here I see a lot of opportunities with the kind of resilience that the circular farming system or the regenerative farming system brings in. So those riskiness of farmers can be reduced up to a great extent. And as you said about the climate change, so here the risk of smallholder farmers can be reduced by adopting these regenerative farming practices. Third is about the opening markets. Now the new kind of markets are looking for sustainably produced goods and services. So these smallholder farmers can produce the items and the commodities that is required by the emerging markets, which are looking for more sustainable products, and those are more responsibly produced products. So again, these smallholder farmers, and if they can take some kind of entrepreneurial aptitude, so there is a opportunity lies for these smallholder farmers. So these are the 3 points I see, which basically strengthen the idea that yes, the smallholder farmers should be supported and they should be guided towards regenerative and circular farming. When we talk about what are the ideas that can be scaled out in for smallholder farmers to be more useful and more profitable in future farming. So in my experience, I see that when we work with smallholder farmers and their aspirations, most of the time agriculture is focused mostly on the technology part. Okay, I have this technology, and if you adopt this technology, your income or your productivity will improve. But many times there is a mismatch between the aspiration of the smallholder farmer and the technology that is being promoted to them. So first, if you can help them to articulate their aspirations and the solutions those are provided towards the smallholder farmers, if there is a match, generally the farmers adopt it and they stay with that. So first is one is to help them articulate their aspirations individually as well as collectively. Now with the NRLM things, now all the smallholders farmers are collected, are organized around different collectives. So these collectives can have individual as well as collective aspirations and adopt the new kind of technology at large scale. While working with these collectives, we have seen there are large scale changes adopted by farmers in groups. So one is working with collectives as well as meeting their aspirations. Second is about the entrepreneurship. You also mentioned in your opening remark. Yes. Can these farmers think of agriculture as an enterprise and the element of entrepreneurial value chain actors? Because the traditional markets, they don't consider smallholder farmers very attractive for the markets because their requirements are very small and the product what they are bringing in is not very attractive for them. But the local value chain actors, we call them agri entrepreneurs, and they can make these farmers attractive for the markets by pooling their demands and the supplies. So they become very attractive for the traditional markets. And here lies a lot of opportunities. And we have seen these value chain actors and the agri entrepreneurs support to smallholder farmers. So I see a lot of potential in entrepreneurship and agri entrepreneurs who are the local champions in the community itself. They can be identified, groomed, and placed back in the community. So they bring a lot of market connect, and they fix the broken supply chain in the villages. So this is the second idea. And third is about access to reliable energy and water control. Because the access to energy, they are still depending on unreliable grid electricity or fossil fuels. So they are again very cumbersome and not very efficient. But now slowly with increasing cost reduction in solar energy and more renewable energy sources, as well as many enterprises are coming who are providing very sustainable solutions for the farmers for energy access and water control. So it brings a lot of reliability for smallholder farmers. So once the reliability is there with energy and water, the smallholder farmers also are ready to invest more in their agriculture. So it increases their income capacity. So I think these are the three big things I see, which has a lot of potential to help smallholder farmers.
Thank you, Ashokji. And if I can extract one more response from you, because you talked about that, in your opinion, what is the most critical challenge that we face when we try to create agri-entrepreneurs? What is the journey from a farmer to an entrepreneur? And if we have to identify one or two things that we can do, because I think technology is there, the technological benefits are to some extent established, but still we are not seeing the conversion of the farmer from being a farmer to an entrepreneur happening at the pace that we want. From your experience, just a quick remark, what could be one or two things that would convert a farmer into an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think one is about mentoring them. So staying together for a substantial amount of time until their enterprise is established. So entrepreneurship, it is not that we provide them a training or exposure and then let them go. So they require some incubation support and some co-traveling until they are stable and their enterprise is I think strong enough. They have good linkages and they are profitable. This is one. And second is about curating the technology for their own context. As I said, many times the technology they are bringing is coming from a very different context, which is not suitable for that area. So again, some intervention in supporting the farmers to acquire more contextual agriculture technology in form of, say, farmer technology centers. Now we all know about KVKs, those are the farm technology centers, but here we are talking about the farmer technology center. So these technology centers are a little different than these KVKs, where the technology are developed
Ashokji, you are breaking up, but I think I got the point.
In their mind,
okay.
Their resource endowment in their mind, their skill set in their mind. Hello.
Go ahead, Ashokji. You broke in between, but now I got the line.
Okay.
Okay.
So I was talking about the farmer technology center. So these are kind of training centers and mentoring centers in the block level, where we can partner with the traditional agriculture extension systems like KVKs or Atmas, and those technology centers can be developed context. So I think they are the two things I see that can help the entrepreneurs to basically be very effective in their own areas.
Perfect. Thank you, Ashokji. I think we got your points. And I think my next panelist is a good segue, because I want to reach to Dr. Melissa now to understand that the circularity, the entrepreneurship, the resilient agriculture are the dominant themes across the world when we talk about the farmers and agriculture. And you have been working with, African farmers and many of the Asian countries at the nexus of climate change, nutrition, grassroots ecosystems, and landscape-based approaches and whatnot. So you have the whole suite of the interventions that are aimed at the small landhold farmers. I would love to know about that. That in your perspective, when you have the global view here, in your perspective, what are the opportunities you see emerging for the small and marginal farmers? I'm especially putting focus on small and marginal farmers because when you talk about these opportunities, in many countries where the farm sizes are big and the farming is a bit different than what it is for the small farmers, it's easier for them to transition. The ecosystem is much more conducive. But when you talk about these, the ecosystem is very difficult. So what are the opportunities that you see, that emerge for the small and marginal farmers that could benefit them, that could make them more resilient and more climate friendly, and also how these opportunities can be tapped? Because we can see the opportunities and there is nothing to be done. So happy to hear your thoughts on that. Over to you.
Thank you, Santosh, and thank you, TRIF, for the invitation to join this really distinguished panel and this discussion. I want to just first preface my remarks by saying that I sit in the World Wildlife Fund United States office based in Washington, D.C. And as many of you probably know, we have a very strong and meaningful office in India, based in Delhi, doing quite a lot of landscape work and working on a range of issues in the Indian context. And so I partner with them, and we're all part of one panda family. But I definitely want to preface my remarks by saying that I've, not the depth and breadth of knowledge that you all have with the Indian context on the ground, especially with the smallholder farmers. So my remarks really will be focusing on sort of the India context and the trends we see, and especially in freshwater and food. That's the domain that I think about. And I'll start off by saying a little bit of what and why WWF cares about this issue. And for those that don't know us, our mission, we have this iconic panda logo. You may know us for our work in tigers. It really is to conserve nature and reduce the most pressing threats to the diversity of life on Earth. And really, we're looking at balancing the needs of sustainable development goals on the one hand, but doing so within the limits of planetary boundaries and what climate and nature will allow. And so we care deeply about meeting SDG 1 and 2, right? Poverty and nutrition. And so if you think about India and the progress this country has made, and really on the backs of smallholder farmers, I have a few points I wanted to share in thinking about what are the opportunities to meet both development goals, but also, development goals for food, nutrition, but also for the livelihood development of smallholders in India. So the first thing I just wanted to note, and this is based on a study that we conducted with Dahlberg in India in 2019, right before the pandemic hit, is that there has been significant progress made in food production and availability for India in recent decades. And over the last 70 years, India is now the largest producer of pulses, 21% of the global market. It is the second largest, it is also the largest producer and consumer of pulses. It's the largest producer of dairy in the world, over 21% of dairy production is in India. And it's the second largest producer of rice and wheat, as well as fruit and vegetables in the world. So that's an amazing accomplishment and status for the Indian subcontinent. The other thing, though, on the other hand, is that at the same time, food production has not resulted in the kind of equitable and sustainable access to good nutrition and quality outcomes you would want to see for the Indian population. So for instance, India ranks on the Global Hunger Index as pretty serious in the condition of malnutrition. So it has dropped from 100 out of 119 countries to 103. In 2018. So out of 119 countries in the world, India is ranked 103 as of 2018, which places it in the serious category. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is. So for instance, also the per capita grain availability has dropped and is lower than in 1991. And it's less than half that of China and even less than that of Bangladesh. So the quality and the availability of nutritious quality food is an issue in India. Even though you have remarkable accomplishments in the overall production levels of many commodities. And so if you think about what is the food quality challenge, it really is around protein and, not just calories, but really around quality. So 80% of Indians currently are protein deficient. That's a net reduction of 3 to 6% since 1993. And really, that is measured against the recommended amount of protein that and quality nutrition that Indian individuals should be consuming. And so the study that we helped conduct was really looking at what is recommended in India in terms of upping the production, just to meet what the nutritional requirements are of the country. To have, everyone, there's a lot of studies. I'm definitely not a nutritionist, but there's a lot of studies showing that quality nutrition will get you the best out of your population, will have lots of economic growth drivers, in addition to the humanitarian reasons why you want to have quality nutrition for your population. So India would need to increase its consumption per capita over 20% of quality protein sources by 2030. That's equivalent to about 32.85 million tons of additional commodities per year. And it would also translate to about tripling the current pulse production to meet the gap solely through pulses alone. And so at the same time, as I appreciated, Santosh, you motivating at the top, there's incredible environmental context for what it would take to scale up production of these value chains, right? Currently water use is 80%, land use is 60% for ag, GHG footprint is 20%. So how are you going to do this when you have crashing water tables, you've got air quality issues, toxic, loads from agricultural lands? The balance between what you really want to scale up for nutrition, but also to do it again within planetary boundaries is really the crux of this. And yet it's an opportunity, right? Scaling up key commodities that drive a nutritious outcome for your country also provide incredible livelihood opportunities for these smallholders. So also appreciated, Santoshi, motivating closing the leaky spots in the supply chain. Food loss and waste is just a no-brainer, incredible one, but also really working across the multi-sector, right? So you have a Rural Development Livelihoods Mission, NRLM. You also have an Ag Ministry and Farmer Welfare, agenda. You have a nutrition mandate, a nutrition mission, and you have an environmental set of goals and standards. How does the Indian government and country and stakeholders, both at the federal and state level, think of a multi-sectoral vision around what needs to be done to scale up key commodities and what is the role of smallholders in doing that? So we identified 4 commodities that have a lot of potential and where there's already, tens of millions of smallholders already engaged. So obviously pulses, but also poultry, dairy, and aquaculture. And then the feed that needs to go to feed all of those commodities is another opportunity. And then thinking across the supply chains and engaging public and private sector action to really scale up what it would take to drive those supply chains to feed the population. But let me stop there with that. I think that is just a little bit of an overview of the kinds of ways we're thinking about this issue, and then how to partner with folks on the ground, like many of the organizations represented here, to think about how to really drive the agenda at a regional and state level, and then with specific commodity value chains in specific geographies. But let me pause there and back to you, Santosh.
Thank you, Melissa. This was very, very helpful. And I think you set the context for the 3 of the panelists who are to follow. All the 3 have been working in different dimensions to make all of this happen, from the government side, from the kind of building the capacity, from looking at those things. So, but meanwhile, there are a lot of chat happening on the Zoom chat box. You can participate in that. People are kind of putting all sort of questions. I'm trying to answer, and I'll capture some of them at the Q&A later on, but I think it's a very vibrant chat going on. So I ask all my panelists to participate whenever they can. But moving on to understanding the small landholder farmers on the ground work by Ashokji, understanding the global perspective and what WWF has seen as the key drivers that would make the transition happen. Some of the recommendations came about focusing on the supply chain, working with the private sector, and a number of initiatives. I think my next 3 panelists are going to talk about the different things that are being done, either by their respective organizations or the government, what they're focusing on building ecosystem. So moving on to Aparna. Aparna had been working very, very closely with the Indian government and running their flagship programs, the Agriculture Infra Fund, which is $20 billion fund and aims to kind of transform the Indian agriculture. But I think we would love to know that you see the context that we're talking about, how the small landhold farmers can move to be more profitable and more resilient. And that would require a number of initiative, a number of capacity building, investment, and some of the frameworks to be put in place. There are two things, if you can elaborate on. One is that what kind of the government initiative that you see, the relevant ones for this cause, for the promotion of SHF or the FPOs or agri entrepreneurs are, doing great work, and we can know and the audience can learn from that or leverage that. And second one is that, the 20 billion fund, that's a huge one for the agriculture sector. How it is going to step up the small landhold farmers ecosystem, because in order to, make them move towards what we are talking about, the resilient and profitable agriculture, capital is one of the critical needs. We need infusion of capital. We need infusion of different forms of capital. So if you can just talk about these two, the initiatives that you see would transform or help the farmer transition, and the role of capital, whether it is sufficient, it is kind of in the right form, or we see some more initiative to be rolled out. So over to you, Aparna.
Thanks, Santosh. And, I think thanks to you for inviting me onto this panel. I think when Anita and I first talked about it, I was, a little bit hesitant. I said, profitable agriculture, way forward. I can talk about, circularity and profitable agriculture. I'm going to have to think about. And that's actually exactly what I did, since I think this has been on my mind for a while, even before I think this invitation. And I really sat down to say, in the context of my own work, like you mentioned, with government, with foundations, with not-for-profits, with business, how does circularity really fit in, right? And I think I realized two things, which I will elaborate on. And I think this is probably not new information for many of us in this room. But I think the first is that, I think economic gains for small and marginal farmers and, many of the principles of circularity are inextricably linked, right? I think there is, no question about that anymore. And I think it's not an either or choice. And I think there are many quick wins that are possible to actually demonstrate this. And it's really up to us to identify those and take them forward. I think the second, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is that a lot of government policy today actually provides a very strong enabling framework, for initiatives, not just for profitable agriculture for small and marginal farmers, but I think sustainable, resilient, profitable agriculture, right? And I think where the gap lies is in that last mile enabling ecosystem that, both the panelists before me spoke about, to really enable them to actually unlock the benefits of what the policy framework provides, right? And I think, if folks like me who have had the, privilege of this 360-degree view have really struggled to connect the dots, I think, that's something that we really need to spend more deliberate time on. So I'm really thankful for this panel, and I think thankful for the Circularity Action Platform that you've set up, to be able to drive this agenda, right? If I just, take a step back and say, if we look at government policy over the last 4 or 5 years, right, the focus has very much been on doubling farmer income. And I think, that doubling farmer income comes with 4 levers, right? If you look at, what are the roots to that? I think everybody talks about price increase, and it's not just, dividing the pie differently, but it's also about growing the pie, through value addition, through exports, through all of that. I think the second is critically, cost reduction, right? And there are many opportunities for that. I think the third is, really critical. Melissa gave us some amazing statistics about India being, the largest producer of so many commodities, but we're also, one of the, we have 20 to 40% food waste in the country today, right? So I think, how do we actually think about waste reduction? And there are, a number of opportunities for new revenue streams for small and marginal farmers, right? And I think Ashokji, talked about agri entrepreneurs and what are those opportunities. And if you look at these 4 levers for really unlocking, I think, profitability, income enhancement, livelihood enhancement for small and marginal farmers, how does this tie in with circularity, right? So I think the idea of cost reduction, fundamentally links to, let's say, regenerative agriculture production, reducing risk, preventing degradation. It also is about optimizing, let's say, resource utilization, right? And many of the panelists here are much more knowledgeable about this, and we'll talk about it. And if you look at government policy, and what the frameworks provide, I think today you have, the PM-KSY, right? Which is, I think was set up in the context of this huge water crisis that, we are on the brink of, if not already in a set of states, which then provides the framework to be able to actually invest in more smarter irrigation solutions, right? I think there's the soil health card scheme, which is focused on digitization, of data around soil health, the right nutrients, et cetera. And, how do we leverage that data to pass back that information to farmers to say, what do we do with it, right? There's this big push for organic farming, and I think that can contribute, very much to the agenda. There are a set of challenges around, being able to get the certifications, the curing period, but that can be, support provided to farmers, right? And I think all of that can really lead to both cost as well as some, value unlock. If you look at the price side equally, right, when we talk about farmer income, I think, if we just put market linkage aside for now and we just talk about value addition, right? A lot of value addition doesn't happen today because very often it's unviable, right? I mean, we don't have the scale in many commodities to be able to set up infrastructure and units closer to farm gate, and therefore it's being aggregated and taken to, tertiary hubs and centers, right? And if you look at the FPO scheme and what it's, intending to do, if you look at the AIF scheme, which I'll talk about and what it's intending to do, I think all of these are providing the enabling environment to be able to really correct for some of these gaps, right? And I think, on this whole value unlock thing, there's also this big opportunity to really focus on, utilization and viability, right? And I think that's where digital comes in. So, looking at different parts of the ecosystem, I mean, you have this digital stack that the government is trying to build to be able to unlock, supply chain management solutions, farmer to farmer sharing solutions. And I think that provides the enabling ecosystem to be able to make that happen, right? If I just take the example of the Agri Infra Fund and you asked me about it, and I think when the government, announced it, I think there was a, very grand vision, right? And I think what that vision was is not to say that we should have, more and more large scale infrastructure. If you look at the contours of the scheme, what it says is that, we need to have infrastructure that is at a cap of 2 crores, close to farm gate, right? And I think all the conditions in the scheme enable that. I think what's amazing about the scheme is 2 things. One is the kind of infrastructure that is being promoted. If you look at that long list, it's fairly diverse, right? It's not just warehousing, it's not just storage, it's not just sorting and grading. There are biostimulant units for organic input. We've worked with farmers in Madhya Pradesh who are actually setting up stem to fiber, waste recycling paths for new revenue streams. There's a big focus on smart farming and precision agriculture. So I think there's huge opportunity in terms of the kind of infrastructure that can be set up, but we're not seeing as much of it as there is potential, right? And I think that's where the last mile support for farmers really needs to come in. The capital is there. I think the last mile support to be able to unlock and access that capital the right way exists. I just want to make one more point about this, which is, it's not just the kind of infrastructure, but the way the infrastructure is being promoted, which is, very much in principle with circularity, right? I think there's a focus on community farming assets with a strong view to say, how do you actually ensure the right volume of utilization, not just one farmer trying to set up one asset which is neither viable nor utilized, right? And not benefiting the community. So I think there's a lot of focus on that, on the right business case and the business models. And I think where the gap really lies today is, I think is being able to say, here is a list of opportunities that really make sense, for farmers across the country in different constructs, right? And then somebody actually at the last mile really working closely with them to be able to say, for my crop context, for my cluster context, for my district context, does this make sense? And then being able to then access a lot of this policy and scheme. And so I think, I'm sure, Srivalli and others will talk about really how to make that happen. And I'm really looking forward to that. But I think in summary, I think the first need of the hour is really to be able to say, what is circularity? What is resilient agriculture? What is profitable agriculture? And how does it intersect, right? And I'm hoping that Santosh, you will really push the narrative on this with the platform. I think the second is really being able to do an honest assessment. I've talked about many policies that are, promoting this. There are likely to be many that are, that don't promote that cause as well, right? And I think that's just the reality of, being in this diverse kind of political economy that we're in. But I think focusing on where the opportunities lie and demonstrating the value is probably the next thing. And then really looking at that last mile institutional structure to say, how do we actually make it possible? And for that, I have a few thoughts, but I'm going to wait, for some of my fellow panelists to come in.
Yeah. Thank you, Aparna. I think, the takeaway point that you were saying that we have the capital, we have the right environment, we have the right roadmap. What we require is that to bridge these gaps where the last mile capacity building, the hand holding so that the capital can be leveraged. And we need to make them informed about the circularity and the regenerative or the new opportunities that are coming, and guide them towards those opportunities. So I think we'll get back to you on this, some of more follow-up questions, but I have Srivalli and Bhaskar ready with me. And Srivalli has been doing a lot of work in supporting and building the ecosystem around the small landlord farmers. And there are a number of initiatives on the digital agriculture, precision agriculture, and overall, I think how to make profitable, agriculture has been the focus, really. And you have also been looking at the climate change and others, work with the state governments and many. So I think one of the key thing that I would, and the audience is looking to learn, is that, how we can build the ecosystems. Since you build that, what are the kind of missing is, what are the pieces that we need to put together in the Indian context? Second, you work with national and state governments, and having your vantage point, what are the 4 or 5 key interventions that we can design for the small and marginal farmers, keeping in focus the circularity and profitability angle? Because I think there are a lot of things we are doing for small and farmers, but if we have to add the layer of circularity or the climate smart agriculture or whatever names that we talk about, which make them more resilient and more kind of contributing, what could be the 4 or 5 interventions that could be layered on the existing ecosystem, existing interventions? So over to you.
Thanks so much, Santosh. So, a lot of my work has been easier with a lot of my fellow panelists, kind of really setting the context well. So I'll probably, just talk a little bit about the ecosystem and what are the ecosystem factors that need to come in, and based on some of our experiences, both at the federal as well as the state government. So one of the things that we feel is that India has, a lot of very well designed schemes and programs, and a lot of trust in terms of driving some of those on a mission mode. Where we tend to be a little less effective is on the implementation side of these grand schemes and programs. And like what Aparna said, it is important that we hold the hands of the government, a lot of the actors and stakeholders, and be in a position to converge a lot of these schemes that tend to individually, in a siloed form, reach the smallholder farmer at independent scale. So based on our experience, one of the things is that it's always important to engage at the federal government level, but where the rubber meets the road is at the state government level. And I think that is very critical of how are you building the blocks of not only looking at using some of the data that is coming in bottom up to drive some of these decision making, but to also have their buy-in from the very beginning, that we are not driving it, it is they who are driving it for the eventual benefit of the small scale farmers in their catchment area. And I think that is very critical, and a lot of the examples that we have worked, whether it is in UP, Bihar, Odisha, and so forth, when we take their buy-in from the very beginning, it becomes a demand-centric approach and not a supply-driven approach. And I think having that change of mindset itself is a good starting point. Secondly, when we build assets, when we build programs, let's not think of doing pilots here and pilots there. Let's try and build assets that can be transferable to the government, to the stakeholder at the end, so that we are building that entire sustainability aspect from the very beginning. And I think that is a very very good learning that we have had, where we have failed to build in some of these buy-in from beginning. We have left those pilots at pilot stage itself, and where we have built assets instead, these have been transferred to the governments to be able to scale it up across the state. Secondly, when it comes to circularity, and when we are talking about resilient agriculture, I just wanted to share some of the example which mostly from the R&D side. India is spending a fraction of its resources on R&D compared to even the closest neighbor. Mainly, and what we are ignoring at this point is that we should have a product pipeline that meets the demands of not the current, but the future challenges that the changing climate and other variabilities are going to pose in for. Just as an example, if you take the example of the US corn belt, the average life of a US corn hybrid is less than 3 to 5 years, which is being planted on the ground. But on the same side, if you look at in India, the average life of a product that is being delivered to the farmer is roughly 20 to 25 years. So what a farmer right now is growing is probably meant for the climate that was 20 years behind, and not for what is needed for maybe 10 years down the line. So we can see this whole gap of translating a product from the labs and the shelves of our R&D institutions to the farmers' field. And this is not only a problem of our R&D institutions, it's a problem of a feedback loop that we have not built in. Because it's important that whether we talk about crop breeding, whether we talk about improvement in livestock systems or livestock varieties, it is important that we have a feedback loop from the market, because markets are the ones that will drive what the farmer grows. That will be the one that will drive what type of demand is coming in from the industry, and we don't have those feedback loops built up very effectively. Because what we grow, we have been growing it for last like 10 years, 15 years, but we continue to do that thinking that there is a market for that. But the product pipeline needs to change. It needs to change, taking into consideration of the markets. It needs to take into consideration of what that particular farm is able to grow in the current scenario. And thirdly, what is the end consumer demanding? So in terms of 3 to 4 things that Santosh, you asked, which are very, very critical, I would say the first thing is, instead of building new ways or new sort of pilots, let's try and support the implementation capacity of the governments through convergence of schemes, programs, as well as having their buy-in from the very beginning. I think that is very, very critical for us to be able to deliver at the end. Second thing is to build a resilient farming system. It is important that we drive 2 important levers. One is diversification and the second is market reforms. When we talk about diversification, I'm not only talking about diversification within crops to grow into high value, but also looking at livestock systems, because we are an integrated farming system. It is the same farmer who grows crops who also has 1 or 2 livestock at the same point. So let's try about how are we diversifying his income basket so that he becomes more and more resilient, but also feed into the circularity. To the point what Melissa had made, in terms of how are we linking a farmer to not only do livestock, but also produce the feed that will be helping in terms of, building that entire livestock population. The third, when we talk about market reform, be have your eyes, ears, and really close to the ground on what is the farmer also consuming. If we talk about farmers not only as producers, he is also one of the largest consumer in the market. 60 to 70% of producers consume from food purchased from the market. So unless we talk about market as a main playing field, it is not possible that we will be able to make changes with respect to what he grows and what he consumes, which is important from the nutrition aspect as well. Because if we are growing something and we are selling it, but at the same time not really making sure that these farming households are also consuming, you are looking at a substantial population which is going to be undernourished. The fourth thing is, when we talk about climate smart agriculture or smart farming, it is important that we focus on a lot of these. There are a lot of technologies we talk about. So when we talk about mobilizing research and development for climate resilience, but it is important that we expand the access to climate informed digital services, whether it is agriculture advisory services or access to insurance, markets, finance, and product safety nets. I think it is important that we look at it more holistically as a bundled service instead of doing it individually. And this same access to use of adaptation technologies as well as agroecological practices, how can we look at a more holistic way instead of again looking at one kind of a company giving one service versus another doing another service? How can we look at a more convergent and a more holistic ecosystem? I think the whole initiative around the agri stack, we should also be looking at how do we use data more proactively. We should not only think about see, government is collecting data, let's look at that. but we should also talk about data exchange of how private data that they are collecting at their own dollars can feed back to the government, but how they can also leverage that data that is being collected from the government. So almost like a, a to and fro kind of a data flow exchange. But at the same time, be realistic that here is a country where substantial producers are going to be small scale. So it is important that you drive your pricing, you drive your technology access to the end mile of your consumer. And lastly, but not less important, is to take a food systems approach. When we talk about circularity, we often talk about from the production lens, or we talk about from the consumer lens. Every food product that is being produced either ends up in a farmer's plate, or ends up in some commercial aspect as an industry, or it ends up in another form to feed into another, like, whether it is as livestock feed and so on and so forth. So here we have to be very careful of how we take the entire value chain approach, that, from the product's production on the ground to the point where it reaches the end consumer. How are we building circularity with respect to even, like, say if it is producing a lot of waste at the production stage, how are we feeding that into another allied industry? Because now is a point of value addition, both at the farm gate level, but also at different points at which, when you add value to the the subsidiary products that are coming out of that industry, it will not only lead to subsidiary incomes, but also in terms of more and more employment generation opportunities in the rural areas. Because as we see the farm sector labor migrating to non-farm sector labor, you need to create opportunities of these kind, which are in the allied sector, which are in these industries which are supportive of the agriculture, to be able to absorb them. Otherwise, what you're talking about is this mass urban migration, where the cities will not be able to bear the brunt of this huge migration of labor coming in from the rural areas. Every economy which is progressing towards agriculture transformation has this problem, and we are at the cusp of it, where we need to translate, or almost move certain part of our agriculture labor to these allied industries, and that is possible only by adding more and more value addition and value addition industries, both at the rural, at the farm gate level, but at different junctures and endpoints. So I'll stop here, but happy to take any comments, questions.
Thank you, Shivali. I think this was a very, very comprehensive insight on what we can do to transform that. And I think this sets a number of things of the convergence, not doing too many things, but kind of putting things together that can drive multiple changes, leveraging what is there, focus on research, and I think when we launched the circularity platform, the key focus was that how we can bring the research insight and help the farmers transition to those solutions. So that was a big focus for us. So thank you for at least ratifying that focus that we had. I'm moving on to my next speaker, Dr. Bhaskar Reddy. And Dr. Bhaskar, the point that Shivali made, that let's not do too many things, but converge and leverage things. And you have been working with the agriculture entrepreneurs, at the grassroots level, building their capacity through your Agri Entrepreneurs Growth Fund. So I would like to know about, how these initiatives could be leveraged for the circularity and other entrepreneurial activities in these areas where we can tackle the problems of, low income from this agriculture interventions, like bringing circularity and regenerative there. And also how the corporates and other critical stakeholders fit into this narrative, how they can be roped in to kind of transform this thing. So these are the two major, kind of pointers that I would like to know, but happy to hear your thoughts on the some of the speakers that were spoken before you. Might have taken some words out of you, but they have given some more thoughts for you to kind of add to it. So over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Santosh, and thanks for inviting me to this interesting and exciting discussion. I think most of the points have been covered by the other panelists. The key points that came out was, it's the big challenge about the last mile delivery and, delivery of commodities. Even if you look at the current situation of farmers, it's not due to the lack of technologies. but because the right delivery that the farmers' income is lagging, and we see farmers' distress. So precisely on this point, we started working on creating this hyper local village level entrepreneurs, who can help small farmers with a bouquet of technologies and services, so that their yields can improve, their incomes can improve, and it's not about one siloed intervention about improving yields or about farm machinery, but end to end, right from seeds to markets. And very happy to inform all of you that TRI has been a great partner to us in this initiative, and we've been doing several of these exciting things together. I think so. That's very, very key. Getting the right delivery is key, especially now that everybody is talking about the climate change implications on agriculture. Erratic monsoons and soil health, soil degradation, and minimal, kind of what the monsoons, changing monsoons, and water availability being low. So I think how do we bring about? There is a much more a greater need for getting our delivery systems right. So that's where we are, very confident that whether it is the agri entrepreneurs at the village level or the farmer producer organizations or any kind of rural delivery systems or the rural delivery networks, will play a key role, going forward. That's point one. And I think the second important point is establishing a right business case for any of the inventions, whether it is circularity or circular agriculture or regenerative agriculture or any of those initiatives. Unless we establish a strong business case in terms of how a particular intervention is adding a delta to a farmer, she will not adopt that technology or service. For instance, if we can, we've done a lot of soil testing, but still a lot of soil health cards have been issued. But the challenge is that translating into an action. These ultimately need to generate into an economic action, which means the farmers adopt it, and there is a clear delta that farmers make out of it, or there's a delta farmers, and then it spreads like a wildfire. For instance, along with the soil testing, if there's the right kind of advisory and right kind of bioproducts, and which will reduce, say, 20% input cost for the farmers, then the farmers would go in droves and adopt the soil testing and advisory, and so it has to go as an entire bundle. It's not just the soil testing. That's the point. That's a very important point we have to understand. So I think establishing a business case and getting the interventions right is extremely important. And then I think this again leads us to the stronger case for rural entrepreneurship. Efforts cannot be siloed. For instance, when you're talking about regenerative and circularity, if you ask every single farmer to do a vermicomposting, one, it's a Herculean task. One, you have to build the capacity of 100 farmers or 150 farmers, and two, a necessary infrastructure has to be created. On the contrary, if you're taking it as an rural entrepreneurship mode, and we're setting up a one village level entrepreneur to create, or develop a vermicomposting unit, a large vermicomposting unit, and can supply. It's not only vermicomposting; it could be a neem-based insecticides. It could be, direct seeded rice machinery supplying to farmers and as a service, and going for a no-till and so on. There could be number of services which are, which would support circular agriculture and regenerative practices. I think these need to be driven in a rural entrepreneurship mode, so that the scale is there and we can extract more efficiencies out of the whole system. That's, I think, the second important point. And I think we should not forget that, going back to the earlier point of establishing a business case, even you establish a business case, one, of course, the farmers will uptake, but there is also a need for a very strong demonstration of technologies and services and building a trust with the farmer. And that again leads to the either the members, the farmers being members of farm producer organizations, or working closely with their fellow agri entrepreneur who can help support them in getting the trust, in showing the technologies and the benefits associated with the technologies and services, and gaining their trust. So trust is an important factor here, and it's not that we catapult suddenly into village and say that this is a new technology and the farmers are going to adopt it. So that's also we have to bear in mind. And last point about the whole narrative around circular agriculture and regenerative agriculture is there is a huge opportunity in terms of carbon financing, I would suggest, IntelliCap and TRI to explore this. Here, I think, when for each of those interventions which are, which are which reduce carbon emissions in agriculture, I think verification and measurements becomes very, very critical. And unfortunately, we don't have enough organizations, working on these aspects, specifically to the Indian context. I think, if you are able to say, 2 tons of vermicompost applied on an acre of land, how much, would it have offset the chemical usage? So those kind of measurements and verifications are very key. I think if you can focus on those aspects, I think there could be some carbon financing tapped for the benefit of the smallholder farmers. So these are a few points on especially around what kind of ecosystem is required for circularity and regenerative agriculture to take off in a big way. And I think that the key point also is leading to the next question. I think it is about how it's not about one organization or 2 organizations doing it. And, it has to be a multi-stakeholder initiative. It takes, really, we have to start building coalitions of government, private sector, NGOs and, several players coming together to create large-scale impact. And from what we feel, I think from of course, the corporates will play an important role in this, and they also would like to ride on the agri-entrepreneur networks or the farmer-producer organization networks that are created, because it will obviously reduce the transaction costs for them. So it's a natural, I would say, integration process for the, and that's the reason why we are working with a number of, whether it's input companies, market off-takers, banks. We work with close to 7 to 8 major banks in getting the financing to the entrepreneurs and so on. So we try to integrate as many partners as possible in this whole story. So and of course the governments play a very important role, and our work has been largely with the state rural livelihood missions, and we get an excellent support from the state rural livelihood missions, whether it is Jivika or UPSRLM, OLM, and UMAID, and several of the state governments. So I think it has to be truly a multi-stakeholder initiative to create this kind of a circular agriculture revolution in the country.
Perfect, Dr. Bhaskar. I think lots of point. I think I was not expecting these very nuanced kind of and very breadth of very, very large breadth of scope of the comment that came. And I think we are also getting lots of comment on chat box. So I'm just changing the structure a bit. I would kind of let go of the closing remark, but I would have a couple of quick rapid fire questions to all my panelists, which is kind of, I think, emerging from these Q&As and also from your pointers. I think the one thing that we all want to know, and Melissa hinted it at, and a number of people hinted at that, the benefits or the cost of the transition dimension. A quick pointer from every one of you. I think we are expecting the small landholder farmers to do a lot of things, move towards the more sustainable agriculture, emit less, and be more kind of contributing and take more risk to produce the nutritive food and do a lot of things. And if I have to kind of put myself in the farmer's shoes, my first question would be that if the costs are private and the benefits are public, why I'm going to do it? So the question I have for everyone, and I can rapidly get an answer from each one of you. A is that how we can help the farmer transition from what they are doing right now to where we want them to go. And this transition will have a cost, some cost, or the investment. Who is going to be investing into this, and in what form, and how we can do that? I know there are capital available, but that capital might not be most amenable to the farmers. So any thoughts from your side that how we can support the farmers quickly, or, in a couple of words in the transition? Can I start with Aparna?
Sure. So I think, I think the harder one is where the costs are private and the benefits are public. I think, as we talked about earlier, there are enough and more opportunities where the costs are private and the benefits are private. And I think if we start there, I mean, it's a simple solution, but I think it's probably one that can get us, meaningful impact quite quickly. And I think Srivali talked about many options. We talked about many options. There are, I think, enough and more value addition opportunities, enough and more waste regeneration opportunities that contribute both to circularity as well as, I think, private benefit. That's one way I can think about it. Beyond that, I'm curious to hear about how we manage the externalities and fund them as well.
Perfect. I think I would also request that when you're looking at the Agri Infra Fund, if you can think of more dedicated focus on transitioning small landlord farmers toward these new initiatives, if that can be dedicated focus, probably something can be more prominent, because sometimes the nuances get lost. So
I'm sorry, just Santosh, on that, I've put something in the chat answering Ankita's question, and happy to kind of have a continued conversation on the chat on that.
Perfect. Thank you. And moving on to Dr. Bhaskar. Dr. Bhaskar, you spoke a lot about the corporate sector and others. I think I just want to know one thing, that your experience, and you have worked extensively with NRLM and other, you have good understanding of that, how these initiatives could be transformed for promoting circular and regenerative agriculture, because we are doing a lot of things through that. Any insight on that, leveraging the existing initiative like NRLM and others?
Yeah, I think definitely NRLMs will play an important role here because they have the resources. They could, do the initial, public investment can come from the SRLMs and NRLM in terms of giving that initial push in terms of validating those technologies and saying, how beneficial they are to smallholder farmers. And that's the expectation that everybody has from the government. So the initial governments the initial investments come from the public sector, and then the private sector would crowd in at a later stage. But from a private sector point of view, also, Santosh, I think there are two important aspects to this. One, the adaptation of the technologies is very key, to the Indian context. And both from a technological adaptation, we are not saying that a good technology has to be downsized and it should come with a lesser benefits, but we could still look at how it could be optimized in the Indian context. That's one. And second, there is also a scope for a business process innovations that could happen. Say, for instance, the latest one we could give is, there is a new mulch tray that came in for orchards, which was never there from Israel. We brought in the technology into India, and we are, of course, even the Tata Trust was working with it. And so we are now introducing it across multiple locations in India. So the cost of tray is about 250 rupees. But what we did was, it's impossible for a smallholder farmer to buy 100 trays for one orchard, because the cost of the cultivation of the entire orchard could be lower than half of that installing the trays. We did a business process innovation in terms of providing it as a service. So I think some of the service models would really accelerate the adoption of the technologies and make it easier for the farmers. So by giving it on a rental basis,
so business model innovations and some of these kind of things would help. Thank you, Dr. Bhaskar. I'm cutting you short because we are running sort of time, and I need to kind of cover a few pointers and also open the discussion to the audience. Next, a quick question to Srivali. I think, Srivali, you very eloquently put that need for the feedback system and bringing the technology and need for research. Any specific suggestion or any specific initiative that you see that we could do? Because I'm talking to you in terms of that, what concrete can be done. I think there's a good initiative to be done. There's a need, but anything specific that we can take it up in next, say, 3 to 5 years, whether by private sector or by the government or by the ecosystem builders or the platform like ours.
Thanks so much, Santosh. So Santosh, I can just briefly mention about one of the programs that we are already working in India, and of course we've seen a lot of success on that program in Bangladesh, where we are talking about modernizing of breeding platforms. And this particular tool, or I would say the program that we are working on with the national R&D institutions like ICAR and BARI and others, is to use that feedback loops to drive the R&D pipeline of a country that is more proactively engaged in terms of what the market demands is, but at the same time what the the changing climate and climate resilience and whether it is emerging pests and diseases would really look like. So if we talk about circularity of agriculture, I think this whole circularity has to start from the production line, which is the circularity between the production to the market, to how we are building resilience of small scale producers. And just to also mention a little bit about, like, when we talk about private gains and public, and how we are looking at funding this. One is that, the public funding always will, will be at a scale where any private funding, whether it is, whether we talk about foundations or whether we talk about, some of these other private initiatives, is also it's going to dwarf it very substantially. But we should also not forget the largest private sector in this country is the farming sector. They are the largest farming private sector who are actually putting in everything that they have, risking everything every season after season. So I think we have to take that into consideration, that, we have to really build the resilience of this particular, catchment, to make sure that we are building that entire ecosystem. There's always an initial funding that needs to come in, whether it is coming in from public sector, private sector, DFIs and other partners, but to really play the catalytic role of how it then is able to transform on its own.
Thank you, Shivali. I think, I'm kind of running sort of time, but I still have some time for the question. I'll get back to a few of the panelists. But there's a comment on the chat box. Sunil ji, हम लोग हिंदी में बात कर सकते हैं, लेकिन थोड़ा सा इंटरनेशनल ऑडियंस है, कुछ पैनलिस्ट जो है उन्हें हिंदी नहीं आती है, तो ये इंग्लिश में हो रही है, बट टीआरएफ की टीम और हम लोग काफी कमिटेड हैं हिंदी में बात करने के लिए, तो हम कोशिश करते हैं कि आगे के डिस्कशन में आपसे बात करेंगे, एंड द टीम वुड रीच आउट टू यू विद हिंदी responses to your questions. Quick thing to Ashok ji, and I'm also now switching to the audience Q&A, so these are questions coming from the audience. What are the different risk factors for marginal farmers to go ahead with regenerative farming in the present context? What are the risk factors?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, hello. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, I think to me the first risk for smallholder farmer is the income risk. They most of the time they think that if I adopt regenerative practices, and till the time my resources are rejuvenated and it comes to full productive potential, my productivities are going to be down and the income I am getting is going to be reduced. So how I will cope up during that period of time? This is one. Second is about the reliability of the offers coming to them. There are many practices or many technologies or many products are coming to a smallholder farmer, promising that it will reduce its cost of production and enhance the productivity. So what is the quality check, or who is ensuring the reliability of it? So presently, I don't see a mechanism around that. So many unreliable and very shady kind of products and processes are being pushed towards the smallholder farmers, and we have seen many unwanted results out of that. So these are the two risks. And third is obviously about the markets. The traditional market doesn't recognize how the things are produced. So there are markets.
So Ashok, just for the sake of time, cutting you and the 3 points that you made: income risk, the quality risk, and the market does not recognize the farmers' regeneration effort, right?
Yes, these are
perfect. Thank you. Moving on to Melissa, there's a question from the audience. Are there any sustainable livelihood models around aquaculture, those who have emerged from your engagement? So any sustainable aquaculture models that you are aware of? Quick response.
Yeah, I shared a recent review article. There are many review articles, but one that just came out recently about inclusive business models globally. And then WWF especially has experience working with the development organization CARE as for more than a decade. And one of the examples we like to hold up is in Mozambique, working with coastal communities systems, where there was a conservation angle about no catch zones, as well as a livelihood and empowerment of where and how aquaculture and fisheries were used for nutrition and livelihood pieces. So I just put those in the chat.
Yeah, I think I got that. Yeah. So another question that we have for that requires a quick response. I think the one question is to me. Okay, I think I have answered that in chat box. There is one question to Srivali. What is your opinion on role of integrated farming clusters program of NRLM to increase the livelihood outreach? Do you feel this will fill the gap?
I would say when we talk about integrated farming systems, absolutely it will fill the gap. But let's be very clear when we start off on scaling of this, when especially when in areas, is there a right business case to do so? Because I think it's important that we start with that assumption that let's try here, let's try there, but it is not suitable for all the areas, because we might be pushing in dairy in areas where there is going to be a huge feed deficit. So just be doing a business analysis of whether that makes sense in that ecosystem, that area, and then only kind of getting into it. So doing the pre-work is important to start with.
Absolutely. So the context is critical here. The next question that I have is, this is to Ashok ji again. How can we leverage the available export market for the small and marginal farmers? What are the opportunities and challenges? Quick response, Ashok ji.
Personally, I see a lot of opportunity even in India itself, if you are producing right kind of products. And for the abroad, I see we have a lot of quality issues, phytosanitary issues, as well as non-tariff barriers to the so-called US and European markets. But in India, the emerging middle class and even the B and C grade cities, we see a lot of demand of many new things, new products, exotic kind of things. Those are exotic as of now. So this quality and the product, if we can produce right kind of products and of the right quality, I think in India itself, we have a huge market, that is the emerging middle class, and our smallholder farmers can serve to those markets. So, and mostly the neighborhood countries, they are our competitors, say the Southeast Asia or other countries, they are producing the similar kind of product that we are producing. So personally, I see a lot of opportunity in India itself.
Okay, so you are saying that rather than focusing on export right now, we can focus and tap the Indian market that is untapped, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I have 3-4 more questions, so quick responses, and I have around 7 minutes of time. I think the one question is again to Srivali. Srivali, a participant is asking how a marginal farmer would address the increasing climate variability and extreme weather events.
See, as far as the technologies is concerned, one is to, right pricing, which I kind of mentioned before. We have to price the technology, but at the same time, there is a need for building resilience from where we bring in a lot of public investments to start with, to make that data available to the farmer at the end user much more proactively. And this is not possible unless we are building that entire pipeline, as I had mentioned. A lot of the farmers are still dependent on the public ecosystems for their seeds, their varietal improvement, and so forth. So that public sector R&D pipeline needs to be strengthened, need to be made more realistic to the current scenario. Secondly, when we talk about small and marginal farmers, a very rapid survey revealed that they are growing varieties that are 20 or sometimes even 40 years old. So, how can we expect them to really be in a position to, be more resilient? Secondly, diversifying your basket of agriculture system, diversifying beyond monocropping is absolutely essential. I saw a lot of questions around the the traditional varieties and traditional crops. If you take the example of states like Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, where millets, which were traditionally the neglected crops, are now considered niche products that are being developed and fetching prices even higher than some of the price cereals. And are being currently looked at as fat foods for looking at diabetics and so forth. So it's not that going back to traditional varieties is only going to be any less, but they are probably now high value agriculture as well.
So to summarize, I think one is that make them more informed so that they are better prepared to handle it. Second, get them more diversified so that they are more resilient. And third, so I think very valid points. I have a very nice question. I should take it because we did not discuss that dimension of the agriculture. This is to Aparna. How do you ensure that the landless and women are part of the planning design and implementation of nutrition sensitive agriculture. So the gender dimension that we have been kind of not keeping in center. Over to you.
I think, this is a really critical aspect, right? And I think starting from policy all the way to, those that actually work and support farmers, unless we consistently mainstream this, it's not going to happen, right? And so, I would encourage everybody in this conversation who's really at the last mile working with farmers to start championing this there. And I think, if we think about FPOs, the number of FPOs I've seen and spoken to where the membership is largely male, the CEO is largely male, and the leadership is largely male. If we can start with even just changing that and have more and more, women leadership in FPOs, more women, at the last mile kind of taking these roles and championing that, I think we will automatically start to see, more gender sensitivity in nutrition planning of agriculture.
You have a follow-up question, not related to this, but you have another question for you. That question is, could you please elaborate how the last mile support system could look like for the farmers transition? Because you mentioned that in order to kind of leverage the fund, there need to be last mile support system. So a quick response to that.
Yeah, so I think, 2 or 3 ways, right? I think if we think institutionally from the government point of view, what we see is, like for MSMEs, you have the district industry cells or centers, some of which work very well, some don't. Can we have district, investment accelerators for agriculture investment promotion, right? And I think, those accelerators help farmers identify opportunities, create the business plans for them, and then monitor, through the other ecosystem stakeholders that that's happening, right? That's one option. From a not-for-profit NGO, private sector, call it what you will, point of view, is there potential, like Ashokji mentioned, to actually set up incubation centers for FPOs, right? And I think, there are many organizations that are informally playing this role, but I think we're expecting farmers and FPOs to do the full spectrum, right? All the way from managing farming practices to cater to market, to managing post-harvest infrastructure, to building market linkages. Can we take some of those roles, and aggregate and centralize them across a set of FPOs, right? I think those are 2 perhaps mechanisms that I can think of.
Thank you, Aparna. I think the last question from my side, and then so this is to Bhaskar. If you have time, I can take one more question. So Bhaskar, the question is that markets in the current avatar have not accounted for the value of ecosystem services that the farmers provide. The ecosystem services, the increased quality of air, the biodiversity, the better groundwater, etc., etc. What can be done by private sector, civil society, and others to correct this anomaly? So how can we pay to the farmer?
That was the point I was referring earlier, Santosh. It's pretty complicated, but I think one of the the ways that we could look at is the carbon financing, especially given the the whole narrative around ESGs and so on. I think that's one way in which we could compensate farmers for that. But again, that requires a lot of investments into verification, measurements, and so on. Unless we cannot move in the direction. Yeah.
Perfect. I think just to add to what Dr. Bhaskar said about the the carbon market or the climate finance coming to that, there are a number of initiatives going on right now. If you look at the voluntary carbon market, is increasingly recognizing the biodiversity, community, and the carbon emission potential of interventions. Both TRIF and IntelliCap team are working very closely with that carbon market stakeholder to see how the carbon money can benefit the small landholder farmers. So anyone who has any ideas, interest, or want to know more can write to us, and we can help them out post this thing. I think Srijit on this panel, if you can just put your email ID, to the audience, then they can reach out to you. And also, I think you have my email ID there in the chat box. One more question that I have, I think is the last question before I this is a question to lots of questions to Shivali. Shivali, this is another question to you, if you can quickly answer. When we talk about the crop breeding, are we considering the nutrition value of these crops? So when we focus on the the crop selection or diversity, are we factoring in the nutrition value?
Absolutely. And I think I also answered that when we talk about biofortification, and this is not fortification, I just wanted to be very clear. Biofortification, wherein the crop inherently has higher nutritive value. For example, high zinc wheat, or, rice and, the pearl millet and so forth. These are the biofortified varieties. If we just look at last year, 22 varieties were released by the ICR. The main issue, and these are, production of these varieties are at par with other high yielding varieties, but it is that whole, the behavior change that we'll have to push for farmers to adopt these varieties. They are not physically anything different from your traditional varieties. So you cannot say that whether this is a biofortified versus others, but we have been able to push for that within the R&D pipeline, which are nutritionally superior. So definitely nutrition is a very key characteristics that we are looking at when we talk about, improvement of the breeding pipelines, but also nutrition with respect to, climate resilience as well. So I think that is also something that we'll have to take into account, that are we looking for those that can fit in the current crop calendar year as well.
Thank you, Shivali. I think I can't thank everyone enough for the kind of range and breadth and the kind of insight we got for the season. I think just to summarize for us, transition of the small landlord farmers is critical on many dimensions. It will require a lot of support. We need to invest into research and technology, in the capacity building. We need to have dedicated quality of support available to them. We need to have capital to them. The number of things we have discussed, and I think for me the takeaway is that transition is possible. It is very much doable, but it will require a fair amount of investment into capacity building, dedicated capital, and kind of conducive framework that would include data and other things that Shivali had mentioned, convergence, etc. But it is possible. We look forward to that. At the platform that we have conceptualized for bringing circularity to agriculture and food system, I think TRF and IntelliCap are committed to do that. We're looking for opportunity to work with you. Reach out to us. We would be very happy to help you transition towards that agenda, and to the partners who are working on that. With this, I want to thank everyone in my panel who have been very, very supportive, making time for this particular discussion, and bearing with us for this long 1.5 hour commitment. Thank you, Dr. Bhaskar. Thank you, Ashokji. Thank you, Aparna. Thank you, Shivali. Thank you, Dr. Melissa. Thank you, everyone. And a big thank you to all the participants. I think apologies for Hindi mein nahi baat karne ke liye, but I think we are taking this very, very clearly that we will be conducting more such sessions in the regional language, not only in Hindi, but many other languages that could benefit the farmers. It's a transition about all the farmers, not only of a few vernaculars. Last but not least, I think we have taken note of the questions. I think Gajananji, Anis, and I have taken note of all the questions. We would try to answer those questions through different work that we do. But more than the questions, give us an insight that what you are thinking and where we can respond to. So thank you very much for the questions, even though we might have not covered all the questions, but we are really thankful and we are acknowledging all the questions. Last point before I start, because I have a 1 minute time left, there is a follow-up session happening after this. So please do stay for that and join that session. The session title, I think Gajananji, this is, just let me reflect the title of the session. If you can just, it's on the data and, okay, I'll rephrase the title. I think I'm confused the title. Gajananji, what is the title for the session post this? You are on mute, sir.
Yeah, it's on the data governance. How
data governance, something that Shivali was talking about. So that if we need to transform agriculture, we also need to focus on data governance. Join that session, and a very, very good evening to all of you. Have a wonderful rest of the day in different parts of the world. I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.